that's done. What is going on? Wonderful people. It is 7 o'clock. Shout out to my leaders who are coming into the space, who will be watching this live on YouTube later on. I hope that you are having a productive week, month, year. Oh, okay. What's this happening here? Let's get those crumbs off of me. Oh my gosh. All right, folks, listen, y'all already know how I set this up. I told you guys this was a discussion that we are having. This setup is going to feel very comfortable and informal. And the reason why I wanted this to feel that way is because I want y'all to bring your questions, and I don't want you to feel like you have to have it all together. I don't want you to feel like, as a leader, you shouldn't still have wonderings and some things that may feel very basic, right? Like if you have wonderings around it, bring it to the space, honey. This is for us. There's a bunch of leaders. We already know that we are doing a darn thing. We don't need to prove it to anybody. And at the same time, we know that there is room for learning and sharing with one another. And so that's why we come into this space. So come in comfortable, come in with your crumbs on your shirt, come in with your t-shirts on and your messy buns or whatever you need to do, but just come into the space open, ready to share, ready to receive. And that's what the Leadership Chronicles is all about. The Leadership Chronicles is a space for leaders to continue to support, love on, and build up other leaders. Say all that to say, welcome in. All right, folks. So my name, for those of you who are not familiar with me yet, is Denise. For emails, I go by Coach Denise at thekeyNSG.com. If you want to reach me, Coach D at thekeyNSG.com. That's the best way to reach me. I am the owner and principal consultant of Never Stop Growing Coaching and Consulting. It is a coaching practice rooted in the belief that in order to transform or in order to expand your possibilities, you have to transform the way that you see yourself. And that goes for both our professional selves and our personal selves. Okay, let's keep that in mind. I am a firm believer in the notion that wherever you go, there you are. And so the challenges that you're having in your personal space are often reflected in other areas in our personal lives. So the professional, even though we want to say we keep it separate, the core of what our struggles are often the same. And so in my practice, I really center my leadership development around the premise of accountability, realistic goal settings, and empathy, baby. Okay. So with that said, I don't want to drag this out because for some reason I get to talking and then 7 o'clock is here. So there's a couple of things that I want to invite you to do. As you're watching, listening in, I want you to think of other leadership discussions that we can have. Now, a lot of my work in my practice, which is called Never Stop Growing Coaching and Consulting, if I didn't say it already, I call it NSG for short, NSG. So a lot of work that I do at NSG is centered around the human service field because that is where my passion really lies. And also it's been where my career has taken me, right? It's been where I've served the most in my professional tenure. And so if you have questions related to that, feel free. If you have questions outside of that, but it's all connected to leadership advancement, as long as it's not focused on technical skills, more so the soft skills, baby, bring that into the space. All are welcome, and we can collectively find the solutions. If you have a subject that you really are passionate about as it relates to advancing leaders, and you would like to talk about that and share your knowledge, this is also a space for you. So please message me at Coach D, COACH, the letter D, at the key, like turnkey, nsg.com. Okay. If you're watching this later on YouTube, those details will be in the show notes. And if you're watching this and you want me to share that, I can type it into the chat for you. Just let me know how you want this to go down, and I'll provide you with what you need. Now, on that note, today's focus is a subject that I am pretty darn familiar with, have been overwhelmed by to some degree, and at the same time, it's something that consistently comes up for us. Brenda Jones, thank you so much for joining. Just to let you know, this is being recorded. So feel free to join in, share your questions, thoughts, responses, and thank you for joining. So just getting started here, and we're talking through leadership, right? And leadership in a crisis, like leading through a crisis and what that entails. And so what I've done for all of us today is I've highlighted a couple of key points to talk through as it relates to responding to crises. And so the 3 points I'll run through, and then I'm going to break them down. The first one is how to quickly and effectively respond to crisis situations. Second, techniques to maintain and boost teams' morale and cohesion during tough times. And the third is best practices for post-crisis recovery and learning. So when thinking about a crisis, those are the key 3 areas that for some reason, no matter what the situation is, tends to come up a lot. And when we think crises, I don't only want us to think about a situation where there is some kind of fight going on or eruption of like physicality or anything of that nature. Crisis can also be a plummet, a major plummet. And if this is stock market, you got stock market plummets out of nowhere and you need to figure out how to move money around. It can also be a matter of a distributor canceling or falling out at the last minute, or a delay in terms of equipment delivery, whatever that may be. Those can be considered crises. And so whatever a crisis looks like for you in your leadership position, I want you to listen with a level of openness just to see where these tips and thoughts apply. And then again, like I said, we're building each other in this communal space. And so feel free to share in the chat, come off mute at different points and share different thoughts. If you're watching this later on YouTube, feel free to share your comments and thoughts there as well. We are building one another together. So kicking into the first topic, or the first point rather, how to quickly and effectively respond to crisis situations. First things first, we have to acknowledge that when a crisis happens, our adrenaline is hella high, y'all. It is really high. And so the first thing that we want to do is we want to kick into action. There's a lot of stuff happening within our bodies that we're not always aware of in those moments of crises once we hear that something has gone wrong. And so as cliche as it can be, and as much as it can frustrate us, we want to find a way to remain as calm as possible, right? And so sometimes people are like, okay, calm down, we got this, and that triggers you. If calm down don't help you, don't say it. But keep in mind that once the crisis hits, your adrenaline skyrockets. And so we don't want to respond from that high peak of adrenaline, because that also means that now we too have entered the crisis state. And when we're responding to crisis, we want to be as neutral as possible. So from a leadership perspective, one of the things I like to do is check myself. And that's exactly how I talk to myself. All right, check yourself. What do you need right now? Because you're about to have to go in and speak to your team and get them ready to go and respond to this crisis. And because we know in a crisis, it's very time sensitive, you don't have a lot of time to do this. So the continuous practice of this is going to help us to improve on how we do with it, right? All right. The second thing is getting clarity. When someone comes to you and they're like, oh, okay, so this crisis happened. I'm going to use juvenile justice. I spent a lot of time working in the juvenile justice world. I've also spent a lot of time in child welfare, and so there's been a host of different crises that I have learned to navigate over the couple of decades of being in human services. But I'm going to use, for example, a juvenile justice crisis. And let's say you have two kids who are in placement and they are fighting and it's real bad. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is I need to get clarity. Whoever's coming to tell me, and keep in mind, time is of the essence. So this is something that, like I said, with practice, we'll get better at. But the first thing I want to know is what needs my attention right now in this present moment with the crisis. And if someone's saying that they're fighting, but this one really instigated, I'm not going to the person who instigated. If that person who instigated is not in the fight, I am going to direct my attention to stopping the fight. I'm not going to direct my attention to the person who is throwing water balloons, let's say, or doing something else that is of lesser degree of urgency if I need to direct my attention towards the fight. That doesn't mean that you totally ignore it, but it means that when you are asking a person for clarity on the fight, that you want them to keep their focus on the fight. If multiple things are happening, what someone can often do is tell you all the things that are happening. You need to narrow your focus and compartmentalize and handle each situation individually. And so staying focused on the fight, I want to get clarity on what needs my attention right now. If they are physically fighting, then that's that. Who is involved? I need to know as much information as possible in a short span of time. And usually what this would look like is I'm gathering as I'm walking. If you have the luxury of time to sit down and kind of write notes, do what you have the time and capacity to do. But I don't want us to hear these tips and techniques that I'm sharing and think that we can just sit down and that what I'm sharing is not practical because it's like, Denise, we don't have no time to do what you're talking about. It takes too long. Know that however you need to get this done, get it done. If you're walking and talking, walk and talk, whatever your capacity allows you to do. But get clarity on who's involved. The who matters, right? And so if we're using the example of juvenile justice, let's say, knowing the who is going to allow you to be able to think about, well, what do I know about these two young people? And who do they really respond well to? Those things really help. If we were to use an example that is not related to youth, let's say you have an event going on and a vendor, this is the day of the event, the vendor was supposed to have been here in like 10 minutes and all of a sudden they drop off and they're bringing all the electrical equipment. You still want to know who, and the who in this instance would be the vendor. And then you want to think through, well, who is this vendor dropping off? Who are they impacting? Oh, they're impacting the speakers. Great. So now I have my two parties. And so from there, the next tip is gather your team. So to recap, the first one is lower adrenaline. Second one is get clarity. Third, gather your team. What I mean by team is who is going to support you in addressing this crisis? And then how are they going to support you? The goal is not to add to the crisis by overwhelming ourselves. The goal is to identify key actors, so to speak, or key players in this who can help you address the crisis that is currently happening. And so in the event that this is a person involved, like a fight or something that I was using the example of the youth, I would want whoever is in charge of like floor management or keeping the peace on that particular area of the floor. I may want to pull in someone that, even if they're not responsible for that area, but they have the capacity, they have a great, strong relationship with any one of the youth involved, I may want to pull them in. Taking this back to the example of the equipment, right, for the event that's coming up. I want to bring the speakers together. because they're going to be directly impacted, and I may want to bring the coordinator together to talk through, okay, let's figure out, speakers, what do you need? How else can we offset this challenge? They're going to be my go-tos in terms of brainstorming and figuring out a solution. So the next part, after you have figured out who can support, you want to put people in position. And so this is where you tell them how they can support, especially in situations where there's like a physical, a behavioral challenge happening, right? Like a fight, or someone's dysregulated and they are in need of some immediate attention because they're in crisis. You want to make sure that you position people to do certain things that don't overwhelm or add flames to the fire. For example, if this is a fight, you don't want 12 staff members surrounding those two young people, because that can feel like they're closed in. It can cause all kind of tension and friction, and it can make it really difficult to separate them out and really break up or de-escalate the situation. Same thing with the equipment, right? You don't want to have too many people who are not involved, because then you have so much coming at you that the main people who are going to be impacted, they may get overshadowed. They may not be the loudest voices in the room, but they are the greatest impacted. And so you want to just say, hey, give them an assignment, so to speak. Here is what I know about the situation. Here's why I asked you to be a part of this. Let's talk through what you're going to be doing to help us kind of get things calm and under wraps. And so after they know what their position is and how they're going to support, the thing that I also like to say is hype up your team and give them praise before they go into the situation and try to start de-escalating. What I mean by that is, in the same way that you checked yourself and you gave yourself what you needed to lower your adrenaline and to be able to respond and hear and receive the information that's needed and then plan accordingly, you want to get your team ready to respond as well. And sometimes when situations happen, especially if it's a recurring situation, and we'll talk about that later on, how to start offsetting those recurring situations, you want to let them know, hey, you are capable. I am so confident. And so I pulled you all together because you are the strongest individuals to address this particular situation in this particular moment. And so praise them a little bit and let them know, as you're giving them their assignment, so to speak, or letting them know how they're going to support, highlight their strengths and let them know why you are assigning this particular function to them. For the situation with the young people in the fight, if you've brought in, let's say, the person who oversees the floor, hey, listen, nobody knows this floor like you do. Nobody knows these young people like you do, in terms of practices and procedures. And so when we're going into this, I want you to be on whatever side here handling this, because that's what you know, and we need you for that in this moment. So notice that I have offered praise, direction, and reminded them of their role in all this. If this is a situation with the equipment, for the speakers who I pulled in to be part of the team and the coordinator, hey, you coordinator, you know the logistics. No one knows the logistics of the program that we're putting on this evening like you do. And so when we're thinking about the equipment, I want you to really think through how this was going to be set up and what you were going to use it to help enhance when the speakers are on. Hey, speakers, y'all know your thing, right? Situations come up. You are crafty. I trust that you're crafty enough to help us brainstorm. So what else would you need to still get your message across if we don't have mics or audio systems set up in this way? Y'all are the experts, you know, right? Hype them up and give them a charge. Those are the things that you want to do in the middle of the crisis. This is just responding to the crisis. And then you let everybody go work, right? I gave you a brief example of what these things would look like. You would know, trusting your own expertise, that you would know what to do when the crisis comes. And when I mean what to do, you would know what to tell people. Hey, here's where you go, here's where you go. You'll know where to position people when the crisis comes. I put these things in order so that way we can remember the key pieces to address in the middle of the crisis. The next area that we're going to cover is techniques to maintain and to boost teams' morale and cohesion during the tough times. And so this kind of gets into what happens immediately after the crisis. This is when folks, the two young people have separated, the event, we've already come up with a plan for it. So this is kind of like right after. And so if there are questions before I transition, feel free to let me know, put it in the chat, come off mute, whatever you prefer. This next one is going to be the after, the immediate after. So the first thing I have under here is acknowledge the efforts and praise your team. Note that I'm going to do a lot of praise talk in here. Affirmations go a hell of a long way when you want people to, one, move, like get into action, and then also behavioral modification. Affirmations go a long way. And I know that as adults, it can feel kind of odd for us to talk about behavioral modifications, but the truth is, anyone on a personal or professional development journey is seeking behavioral modifications. Often it comes in the form of us transforming our thoughts. And so that's what talking through these techniques are. But the transformation of our thinking leads to different behavioral outcomes. So that's why I say it like that, right? And so acknowledge the efforts. After the crisis, there can be some uncertainty, there can be some blame going around. And so you want to quell this by acknowledging the accomplishments. And I mean, get into gear with this as soon as possible, right? So using the same two examples, I would say something to the effects of, in the instance of the two young people fighting, once they were able to break that up, hey, so-and-so, to the floor director, let's say, hey, so-and-so, thank you so much. Like the way that you reminded everybody of where the rooms were, where this situation was, so we can move them into separate spaces. That was really helpful. Thank you so much. In the instance of the equipment, we can say, hey, coordinator, thank you for running down the different functions of the audio equipment and what they were serving and what they were supposed to do, right? This was going to help us with the enhancement of the music, and that was going to enhance us with the sound of the background noise. And so because we had that awareness, we were able to figure out how to offset those challenges. Thank you, right? You want to give praise for what they did well, okay? And then the next thing that you want to do is reiterate and redirect focus on progress. When we address our first efforts to respond to a crisis may not put the fire completely out. But what it should do is get us to a place where we can navigate through and see what else needs to be done, right? In the instance of the fight, the kids are still pissed, but at least we got them separated so there isn't this physical harm escalating to the point of hospitalization potentially. And if it does escalate to hospitalization, then we were able to separate them to then get them the medical treatment that they need. In the instance of the equipment, it didn't bring back the equipment, but it helped us to reconfigure the program if we needed to, or reconfigure different aspects of the seating arrangement so that the speakers were central and their voices were able to carry, right? So it doesn't necessarily eliminate the problem, but it does get us to a place where we can see, hey, this is now what we're working with. This is where we need to continue to work on seeing some progress. And so instead of doing the blame game, you didn't do this right, you should have said this is messed up, that's messed up. We want to say, hey, in this moment, none of that is helpful. And to be perfectly honest, blaming and should haves are not going to help us if we stay focused there. So let's talk through what we are going to do to continue to improve this particular situation. And this situation being the crisis. And that can be with the young people. The focus may be on a couple of different things, right? It may be on how long has this problem been going on? How did this particular situation start now? And a host of other things, right? But you're going to ask those questions once you get everybody refocused on progress, continuing to make progress, right? And you can lead that conversation by highlighting, okay, here's where we presently are. They're no longer fighting. What else do we need to do tonight? What else do we need to do today? With the situation of the equipment, okay, we have moved the chairs around so that the speakers can be in the middle. What else do we need to do? How is that going to impact the audience? Let's think through these things now. And so you have your team, their focus is redirected on the progress. And sometimes you may need to continue to reiterate that point depending on how people felt in the height of the crisis de-escalation. And that's okay, because you have the ability to do that. And so here's how. You want to point out what was addressed or de-escalated, right? Just basically restate what your team did from a praise perspective. And then you want to engage in solution-focused conversations that build off of what the team just presently did. Again, note that I'm stressing the importance of staying focused on the here and the now, because the truth is, a lot of these crises that we experience in our leadership roles are so multi-layered. And we can easily go off and start pinpointing problems in other areas that need to be addressed. But the question is, does it need to be addressed in this moment? Is that something that we need to place our focus on right now? Likely it's not, but there is a place for it, and I'm going to get to that. So we want to engage in solution-focused conversations that builds off the accomplishment of the staff during the crisis. And so this helps to keep them engaged in this present moment. And it also helps to keep them engaged in future situations, because they start to see you as someone who is competent and willing to work through the situation to its entirety. You are willing to see it through to the end, and they are building that trust and being able to see you in that way when you are able to redirect the focus back on the progress. The last point under here is to engage the team in reframing and steering clear of the blame game. So I talked about that at the top of this particular section, right? How it can be easy to go into this blame of who shoulda, woulda, coulda. We want to engage our team in being able to do this for themselves. So you as a leader, it looks amazing when you're able to highlight their success and able to say, okay, you know what, we're not going to point fingers. We're going to look at ways to create solutions from what we've learned. Sure, that looks great on you. The other thing that you want to continue to do is you want to build leaders. That's what we do. And so you want to begin to show your team how it's done. And the way that you do that is by engaging them in conversations that help them to reframe and shift blame, not even shift blame, reframe from blame. Reframe, I said reframe. Anyway, and what that looks like is being able to ask the question, hey, if someone's in the middle of blame, well, let's think about the situation, like bring up the reality of the situation. Well, let's think about this. There was a lot happening. So what do you think? What did you see that was working with all the chaos that we were dealing with in that moment? What did you see that this person did that was working? And if there are other questions, throw in questions that start to that start to really get them to thinking. Because sure, let's say in the instance of the two young people engaged in the fight, that a particular staff member was standing on the side to where they could have safely physically removed one of the young people apart, but instead they changed physical positions and walked around another way. Staff members upset, and this is like real situations that I'm thinking through. Staff members upset, blaming like, you should have stayed there, you could have pulled them apart. Okay, yeah, could have, but let's think about all that was happening, all the movement that was going on. Hey, so and so, talk to us a little bit more about the decision that you made to move. Help us see that a little clearer. This allows us to see the humanity in other people's actions, and it allows us to see where the person was coming from, right? We all make judgments based on the best of the knowledge that we have. And so you want to start giving people an opportunity to highlight their thought process. And that creates greater space of understanding within one another. And it removes blame and sheds a light more on the learning aspect of it all. And so the tip that I wrote in here was just to be sure to stress that this is not a blame thing, that this is an opportunity for all of us to reflect on what actions we want to see continued and what actions we might want to work on improving going forward. Which now brings us into future planning. So this is beyond the crisis. Okay, and this part is all about best practices for post-crisis recovery and learning. And so in this section, I have 3 key points, as with the other ones. Debrief, 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 debrief. One of the things that is, to some degree, we would say, oh yeah, debrief, that's an obvious one. But when we think about how work continues to happen so fast around us, right? You finish one crisis, but then there was like 18 tasks that you still had to do. Then another crisis comes up. Now there's another 17 tasks. There's like 12 different meetings put on your calendar. All of these things can easily take us away from that crucial debrief period that really can help us improve practices going forward. And so I would encourage you to look at the debrief as a natural part of crisis de-escalation. Okay, so it's almost just like a checklist. Did you calm the immediate fire, so to speak? Did you calm the immediate crisis? Did you reflect on immediate next steps? Great. Now, did you debrief? That is the full closure of the crisis response. Debrief. Excuse me. Within that debrief time, it is going to also be very important, as with all the other things we talked through, what you focus on. And so for the debrief, phrase inserted again. What worked well? Highlight your team and let them highlight each other, right? The last point that I brought up in the last section was engaging your team in learning how to reframe. And so you want to start them off with what worked. Have them start turning their wheels, if they haven't, on the highlights of this. You also weigh in. What worked? What could we do differently? Language matters, so I love to do this inclusive we talk. What could we do differently? And within the inclusive we talk, right, I'm not oblivious to the fact that sometimes it's just that one person that screwed up really bad. What we are all doing is we're taking accountability in our own way without shedding a huge spotlight on the person who could stand to do the greatest amount of improvement, so to speak. And so what that will look like is, what could we do differently? When we get to that person, we can start talking through and do some more exploratory questions with that person. So it's not like we're blaming them, but we're collectively starting to build out on what would that look like? You're sharing these ideas. So in a very practical sense, how would you do that? thinking about if this would have happened next time, what would help you remember that this is the idea that you came up with? Or if they didn't come up with the idea and you made the suggestion, or the team members made the suggestion, what would help you to remember next time that this is something that we discussed? How natural does this feel for you? What kind of practice would be most helpful? And then where could us or the rest of your team members be of greater support to you? Those are ways that you can explore that when there is a particular person who is the focal point in terms of areas or needs of improvement in that crisis situation. So we have what worked, what could we do differently, what did we learn? What did we learn? In any situation, any crisis situation, you want to walk away with having learned something, even if it's adding a greater emphasis on the things that you already knew. We learned that this situation has been going on for far too long and it continues to happen. So we need to really focus on how to offset it. That may be what you learned. And then what opportunities exist for improvement? So after you've gone through the praise of what worked, figured out what you want to do differently, separated out what you learned, now we want to talk about areas of growth, and that I like to frame as opportunities for improvement. And that's where you want to talk through some of that corrective action piece. So instead of saying like going down people's throats and saying this can't happen again, and we're gonna write you up, or this or that happened. One, if there's a write-up involved, you definitely want to separate the person out and do that separately. But if there's a situation where, again, blame is coming into play, we're not looking at this we're not focusing on who messed up. We're focusing on the opportunity that exists for improvement. That is under the debrief category. And so I know that was a lot, and the tips that were shared here may feel like a lot. No worries. I typed these out and can share them. All you have to do is send your email and I will send them over. The second part of the practices for post-crisis recovery and learning is to encourage proactive thinking and action. So this is where you want to examine if this is an ongoing issue, or examine if this crisis was part of a larger systemic challenge. And so what I mean by that is, if this is a recurring situation, then we need to identify how often this happens, identify the patterns around it. How often does it happen? Who's typically involved? Where does this stem from? And then for the other part, if it is part of a larger challenge where it's like, okay, the budget was, for example, with the equipment, the budget was really low and the vendors found, I don't know, the vendors got this last minute call because our budget was too low. Okay, well, that's part of a larger issue in terms of the agency's ability to set aside proper funding or something like that, what have you. You want to isolate the situation and break it down. Who's involved? How often does this occur? And who do we need to go to try to get resolution? And those are the ways that you start to address the issue in hopes of being proactive and reducing the likelihood of it happening again. Okay, and so what's the best way to communicate that? Is it written form? Is it bringing folks together for a meeting? These are all questions that you not only come up with solutions to, but you also want to take action on. Because another thing that I'm sure we all know as leaders is we can have a whole bunch of great ideas, but until we act on it, they're just ideas. So you want to put a plan in place to take action on those plans that you're coming up with, right? And the last part, no shock there, it is praise the team. Praise those who are involved in this discussion, this debrief discussion. Praise them for their commitment to problem solving and practice improvement. We cannot do praise enough. In crisis situations, after the adrenaline shoots through the roof, the exhaustion on the other side of it can be just as high. And now you have a group, you included, a group of folks who have just responded to a situation, have to go back and just do their regular tasks. And then the thought of it happening again. And if this is a recurring issue, all the more challenging to the team members and all the more difficult it may feel to them, right? And so we want to be able to use praise as a way to say, hey, I see you. I acknowledge what's going on with you, and the effort that you're putting in to continue to support this work. And so thank you for that. And then highlight how integral to the work they are. Now, as leaders, another thing that I have heard and have experienced firsthand, hell, is that it can feel very thankless. And so we want to really foster this sense of us being in this whole thing together. And so even though you were spearheading the planning and the discussion and putting all the players in motion and what have you, creating this space where folks feel like they can both give you constructive feedback and give you praise is going to go a long way in strengthening the team's dynamic. And it also, it feels hella good to hear what your team members think about how you handle the situation. And if you can keep this going as a practice, what you have is a group of individuals who are more open and communicative with both the successes and the challenges of actions. And so sometimes you'll start to learn, or not even sometimes, what will happen over time is that your team members can give you more direct and honest feedback about how you can support them better, which then helps them to do a better job on their end going forward. And so everybody is collectively rising together. And so those are just some thoughts on how to lead through crisis. And when it's all said and done, right, after you've taken care of the problem solving, check back in with yourself. The same way you checked in with yourself at the beginning of it all, check in with yourself after the immediate crisis is done. Check back in with yourself after you've talked about the planning that happens directly after, and check in with yourself again after the debrief. And what do I mean by checking in with yourself? I mean, like, really doing the same things that I'm saying that you should do for your team. Celebrate yourself. Congratulate yourself on the things that you did well. Acknowledge the circumstances that you were under. Oftentimes crisis is a crisis because we weren't prepared for it. And so we didn't know it was going to happen and what have you. So really acknowledge that this happened in the middle of the darn day. I had zero expectations that this was going to go down. And yet I jumped up and I was able to pull these people in and look at what they did. We had this conversation afterwards, so we were able to keep it going. Like, talk to yourself in that way. And I know it can feel like, for what? Or I don't have time to talk to myself like this because I got some other stuff to do. We have to make time, because if not, we are going to continue to do this kind of up and down roller coaster, adrenaline high exhaustion. If we don't allow ourselves to slowly come down by highlighting our successes, telling ourselves, just reminding ourselves how well we did under the circumstances, and then allowing ourselves to see how we're going to continue to improve by also being honest with ourselves about the adjustments we need to make in our actions, then we're just going to be constantly thrown wherever the wind blows us. And so avoid burnout in that way, right? Work can be what it is, but the job is always going to find somebody to replace you. The work is always going to find a way to get done. Like, the company's going to find a way to get the work done. You have to attend to you and your integrity, your style and your nature as a leader. that is all yours. It is the thing that you are constantly building on. It's the reason why you're viewing this. It's the reason why you're here, to continue to build on that, right? And so take that, prioritize it, make the time to celebrate you, to acknowledge you, and to continue to grow and advance you. So that way, whatever you do next, whether it's continue on in the position that you're in or look for the next, you have already established this norm of rebalancing yourself when the work starts to work your nerves, right? You know how to kind of bring yourself back to center. That's a whole other workshop that I have, where I talk about real-time self-care, because I can't stress enough how telling folks that, oh, we're going to take our vacation, or we're going to go get a massage, or go do that. Baby, that ain't going to help you when you got these two youth that's fighting. One of them just elbowed you in the back, and now that is the vacation that's coming in 2 weeks is not going to help you. We want to be very, very responsive to our needs. In the same way that you address the crisis is the same way I want you to attend to you. And so on that note, I'm going to do a quick recap and then just check in to see if there are any thoughts or questions before we close out. So, leading through a crisis. Under the first category, how to quickly and effectively respond to crisis solutions, you want to lower your adrenaline, get clarity, and gather your team together. Put them in position. Second part, techniques to maintain and boost teams' morale and cohesion during tough times. You want to acknowledge the efforts and praise your team, reiterate and redirect the focus on progress, and then encourage your team to refrain from blame and promote reflection and growth. Let me say that again because I stumbled over my words. Engage the team in refraining from blame and instead promote reflection and growth. The last one is best practices for post-crisis recovery and learning. You want to debrief. You want to encourage proactive thinking and action. And then, of course, you want to praise the team for their commitment to problem solving and practice improvement. So on that note, we are done with all that I had to share. If there are tips, because we know this is just some thoughts and suggestions, this is not the end all be all. There are so many expert thoughts to add for us to start building into our own, continue building on our own toolbox. So happy to hear it. If you want to come off mute or if you want to